Hi, and thanks for tuning into this video. So one of the questions I get asked the most is when should I use the major pentatonic versus the minor pentatonic scale? And that's usually followed by, should I be using the major pentatonic over a major chord sequence and the minor pentatonic over a minor chord sequence? Well, I've seen this subject explained in many different ways, and in this video I'll be outlining my approach to how, where and why I choose to use either the major pentatonic or the minor pentatonic. And if you're not already familiar with the various fingering patterns for the major and minor pentatonic scales, there's a link in the comments section below where you can download a free PDF which shows all 5 positions of each scale. Okay, so let's start by looking at a minor chord sequence. And this is probably the easiest to deal with as far as pentatonic scales are concerned, because for a chord sequence where the home chord is a minor, the minor pentatonic scale is always the best choice. So for example, over an A minor based chord sequence, you would use the A minor pentatonic scale. And a good example of a minor chord sequence would be the solo section from Stairway to Heaven, which uses this chord sequence. And the A minor pentatonic scale works really well over this, so let's have a quick look as to why it does. So here are the notes in the A minor pentatonic scale: A, C, D, E and G. Okay, so now let's compare those to the notes in the chords. And you'll see that apart from the F note in the F major 7 chord, all the notes in the chords are in the A minor pentatonic scale. Okay, so now let's have a listen to the A minor pentatonic scale over this chord sequence. So my first rule of thumb is that over a minor chord sequence, the minor pentatonic is always the best choice. Now let's move on to a major chord sequence and see which pentatonic scale works best. Well, for me, the key to knowing when to use the major or minor pentatonic is to know what notes are in each of those scales and how they relate to the notes in the underlying chords. So as an example, let's take this chord sequence in A major. A, F sharp minor, D, E. And here are the notes in each of those chords. Now let's look at the notes in the A major and A minor pentatonic scales and compare those to the notes in the chords. So we can immediately see that the A major pentatonic doesn't contain any notes that aren't in the chords. So soloing over this chord sequence using A major pentatonic will always sound very melodic. But if we now look at the A minor pentatonic scale, it contains a C, which is the flat third or minor third, and the G, which is the flat 7. And neither of those notes are in any of the underlying chords. And when those two notes are played over a very upbeat and happy sounding major chord sequence like this, to my ears at least, they sound quite uncomfortable. And that's why over this type of upbeat and happy sounding major chord sequence, I would always use the major pentatonic scale because it has that melodic and upbeat sound and feel to it. And here's an example of how A major pentatonic sounds over this A, F sharp minor, D, E chord sequence. Okay, now over this type of chord sequence there is one situation where I sometimes briefly use the minor pentatonic scale to add a bluesy twist before reverting back to the more melodic sounding major pentatonic, and I'll try and explain that now. So as this chord sequence is in the key of A major, let's look at the chords in that key. They are A, B minor, C sharp minor, D, E, F sharp minor and G diminished. Now in many forms of music you'll often hear a chord sequence where the 5 chord resolves back to the 1 chord, and that's the case for our chord sequence here because the E, which is the 5 chord, resolves back to the A, which is the 1 chord. And I sometimes like to create a bit of tension in a solo over the 5 chord and then release that tension over the 1 chord. So for example, I could use the A major pentatonic scale over the A, F sharp minor and D chords to create a very melodic and upbeat feel, and then use the minor pentatonic to create a bit of bluesy tension over the E chord before resolving back to the major pentatonic over the A chord. And here's an example of that. So in summary, over an upbeat and happy sounding major chord sequence, I normally use the major pentatonic scale to give the solo a strong melodic feel, but I sometimes use the minor pentatonic over the 5 chord to add a bit of bluesy tension before resolving back to the more melodic feel of the major pentatonic. Okay, so now let's look at a more rock-based major chord sequence, and the chords are going to be A, D, and then I'll throw in D sus 4 just to give the chord sequence a bit of movement, like this. And although this is also a major bass chord sequence, just like the last sequence we looked at, this one has a much more blues rock feel to it, and this means we can use both the major and minor pentatonic scales. And how you use them is purely down to the sound you want to create. If you want a more melodic and upbeat sound, use the major pentatonic. If you want a more edgy and bluesy sound, use a minor pentatonic. And here's an example of mixing both pentatonic scales over this A to D chord sequence. So I would apply this principle of combining the major and minor pentatonics to any major or dominant chord sequence that has a rocky or bluesy feel to it. And with that in mind, here's a short solo over a slow 12-bar blues in A, which again mixes both scales. Okay, so let's have a quick recap on my approach to using pentatonic scales. Number 1, over a minor chord sequence, the minor pentatonic is always the best option. Number 2, over a major chord sequence with an upbeat and happy feel, I prefer the major pentatonic as it has a more melodic sound and feel. But I do like to sometimes play the minor pentatonic over the turnaround section where the 5 chord resolves back to the 1 chord. So in the example we looked at earlier, that's where the E chord resolves back to the A. Number 3, over a major or dominant chord sequence with a more rocky or bluesy feel, I usually mix both scales. The major pentatonic when I want to create a strong melodic feel, and the minor pentatonic when I want a more bluesy or edgy sound. So I really hope you found this lesson on how, where and why I like to use either the major or minor pentatonic scale useful. And if you have, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.